Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good night, wherever you're joining us from in the world. Welcome back to day 3 of the ESIP Plenary meeting. I hope you enjoyed that clip of River Runner, a new tool that I know a number of ESIP folks were involved with making. I am always kind of cheering on that raindrop as someone who has formerly worked on flow path mapping in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I love to see the scalability of this tool. It's really fun. I think it's a wonderful way that we can connect people, especially in inland states, to coastal waters and water quality. So Megan put the full link to that tool in the chat if you want to check that out if you haven't already, but wanted to make sure you guys all saw that. So thank you for joining us today for our plenary on open science in the private sector, making data more accessible through innovation. I want to take a moment to really thank our premier sponsor for this January meeting, Microsoft. Without sponsorship, meetings like this are not possible. We are really grateful for their support, as well as the support of all of our sponsors. Today, I would like to introduce you to Rob Emanuel with Microsoft. Rob is a geospatial architect at Microsoft, where he is part of the Environmental Sustainability Solutions team building the Microsoft Planetary Computer. Take it away, Rob.
Thanks, Susan. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce the plenary speakers and address the crowd. And I'm proud to be representing Microsoft and our environmental sustainability team as the premier sponsor of this event. We believe collaboration on Earth data and services will be a critical part of the work to meet the immense sustainability challenges that are facing us now, and those greater challenges we'll face in the future of our changing climate. Earth data is critical to meeting those challenges now, and even more so in the future. But the complexity of Earth data provides its own set of challenges, as many of us here know. And that complexity is rising, with a growing need to scale the work using Earth data in the face of these planet-sized problems. However, most users of big Earth data are still downloading to local storage, when it's clear that the scale needed will require scalable systems like HPC or the cloud. We need better tools and technology to move things into these scalable systems and ensure we're making those tools and systems accessible to as many users as possible. But even beyond the technology, the solutions to unlocking the full potential of Earth data will require collaboration between the public and private sectors, between researchers and implementers, between the people creating the data and technologies, and those that actualize the value of that data to better monitor, model, and manage Earth's natural systems and move us towards a more sustainable future. And there's no one company or government or research department that's going to solve these challenges alone. Communities and organizations like ESIP are a critical connector for that necessary collaboration. And I want to thank all of you for collaborating on this shared mission, the mission to unlock the value that Earth data can provide. And I'm happy to be working with you all on this shared mission, either directly or indirectly. We all have a part to play in this broader collaboration. And I see Microsoft's part as developing technology and cloud capabilities that accelerate the work of utilizing Earth data on the cloud and at scale. That's why my team is building the Microsoft Planetary Computer, which enables open access to Earth data in a way that integrates and pushes forward the open source ecosystem of tools around data access and analytics on the cloud. We have a catalog of data that is available for free use with over 30 petabytes of Earth data and growing. And we're not only hosting the data, we're providing tools and services that make the data accessible, whether it be for research or for operational workflows. And we're as much as possible building on open by using and contributing to open source and open data efforts. The commons of open data, open source, open standards, and open science is a critical accelerator to the collaboration the world will need to meet the challenges of the future. I hope that the work we're doing can help people connect with the amazing Earth science work done by this community, and that we keep finding better ways to collaborate as we move forward towards achieving our common goals. With that, it's my pleasure to kick off our plenary on open science in the private sector, making data more accessible through innovation. I'll now turn things over to our speakers. Esne Uzo-Okoro, who's Assistant Director of the Space Policy at the White House Office in Science and Technology Policy, Allison Wolf, who's CEO of Vibrant Planet, and Kevin O'Brien, who's CEO of Orbital Insights. Take it away, Esne.
Thank you so much, Robbie, and thanks so much, Rob, and good morning to you all. As Rob mentioned, I am Esne Uzo-Okoro, and I come to you from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where I assist the President's Science Advisor to determine civil and commercial space priorities. And I'll start with a little bit of what OSTP is and some of my activities that are very well aligned with the work that you all are doing. First, OSTP was established by the National Science and Technology Policy Organization and Priorities Act of 1976 to provide the President and others within the Executive Office of the President with advice on scientific, engineering, and technological aspects of the economy, national security, homeland security, health, foreign relations, the environment, and the technological recovery and use of resources, amongst other topics. So we've got a breadth of topics that we cover. Now, OSTP leads interagency science and technology policy coordination efforts, and we also assist with the budget process with determining federal research and development budgets with the Office of Management and Budget, and we are a source of scientific and technological analysis and judgment for the President with respect to major policies, plans, and programs of the federal government. Now, within OSTP, there is a subcommittee, a group, the U.S. Group on Earth Observations, we call USGO, which is chartered by our National Science and Technology Council. And this subcommittee's purpose is to plan, assess, and coordinate federal Earth observations and research activities. We foster improved Earth system data management and interoperability. We identify high priority user needs for Earth observations data. We also engage in internationally with international stakeholders by formulating the US position for and coordinating US participation in some of the intergovernmental group on Earth observations work. And I'd like to shift now to how our work in Earth observations fits into White House priorities. And by our work, I mean all of us. So the administration's priorities includes, climate, equity, economy, and restoring America's global leadership. And all of us who work on Earth observations support each of those priorities because we enable individuals and organizations like yours to make informed decisions to boost the economy and to ensure national security and public safety. Earth observations, as most of you know, form the backbone of climate research, monitoring, compliance, and mitigation efforts. Specifically for the climate priority, Earth observation, remote sensing, and in situ are the foundational science-based decisions. There's a higher density of sustained observations that allow for smarter infrastructure with lower carbon footprints. We help to mitigate risk to infrastructure. We help to understand the security implications of climate change. We underpin the conservation of our lands, waters, and biodiversity, and we enable climate smart agricultural and forestry practices. And when you think of the priority around equity, one thing USGO does is it pursues initiatives that enable environmental justice, and the US Open Access Data Policy supports the building of a data-driven climate and economic justice screening tool, actually. And just last month, during the Plenary, actually it was 2 months ago in November, there was an anchor session where we had many examples of how open data from a trusted source like GEO allows for solutions to transboundary issues in politically sensitive areas. And this trusted data really opens doors to discussions that lead to engagement. And we've got many examples through the USGA website of how we've been engaging internationally through these trusted data and tools. And the administration is also committed to ensuring that all federal data is made available without barriers to everyone to use, and overcoming challenges either at the national, regional, or local level. Now, when you think of the priority of the economy, data science is one of the fastest growing job sectors, and collectively activities by USGO can help increase the number of people from underrepresented communities in this field. And USGO is actually working with the private sector to lower barriers and increase acquisition of commercially based observations and analytics, and also further entrepreneurship. And as I've alluded to a little bit, internationally, to help restore our global leadership through US leadership in Earth, in GEO, and in other intergovernmental organizations. We work with global partners to ensure Earth observations and geospatial data is fully integrated in the monitoring and measuring of global mandates such as the Paris Climate Agreement, the Convention on Biodiversity, and also the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. We can leverage international investments and activities to improve the United States investments, and through, our public-private partnerships, we have an opportunity that we take seriously at OSTP. And even at last month's AGU meeting, Dr. Eric Lander, who's a science advisor to the president that I work for, talked about ferocious innovation and comprehensive measurement. He said ferocious innovation means setting bold goals and overcoming the fear of failure and focusing on how to succeed even in really hard problems, and that we really need to be open and try as many possibilities in parallel. And we do that by assessing our progress. We know that we need vastly better science-based observations to measure, monitor, and report. And we know that, the US, being the world's leading scientific and technological innovation, home to extraordinary people and research institutions, Dr. Lander talked about us being a place with a proven ability to drive innovation and deployment. And, but how do we achieve these bold promises that Dr. Lander talked about? We will need robust public-private partnerships. And I'd like to conclude my remarks by highlighting two efforts that are helping us moving that direction. The first is a recent USGO-sponsored tabletop exercise. It was on big data use in wildfire management. And I'm pleased to announce the results of this successful exercise that has been completed, and it's actually published on the USGO website. And I'm also happy to be sharing the stage with two of the participants of this exercise. So thank you, Allison and Kevin, for your valuable participation. Now, after that, I'd also like to talk a bit about the National Space Council and highlight the US Space Priorities Framework that was published last month. So on the tabletop exercise, what we found is that there's a growing awareness of the need for the US government to better understand the commercial Earth observation industry to provide imagery, data products, and services to support its mission. And we saw that the purchase of commercial Earth observation and geospatial data is rapidly evolving, and the government's understanding of how to make these purchases efficiently and effectively was also rapidly evolving. And we realized that there are different starting points across the government on the acquisition of Earth observation and geospatial data, but we wanted to work within USGO to understand those differences and come to common practices where possible, because the government realizes that there's an impact to our academic and international partners when the government moves to commercially provided data that used to be provided by government platforms. So the exercise is conducted under the auspice of USGO by the Center of Spatial Law and Policy and ESUP. And this exercise brought together not only providers of the commercial Earth observation geospatial data, but also legal and acquisition specialists, along with federal government employees who are mostly observing, and the academic community, excuse me. So the exercise focused on enabling, again, us to understand how we can leverage commercial data from industry to identify the causes and consequences of wildfires, which is our use case, as well as determining the risks to surrounding populations, ecosystems, and infrastructure of these wildfire events. The findings from the discussion illustrate the challenges and opportunities that the US government faces in advancing its ability to just integrate commercial capabilities and products in critical application areas. Now, two of the key findings were that the government plays a unique and critical role in the Earth observation enterprise. We are providing data, but we're also the customer, and we regulate the commercial industry. And so, giving that having those roles makes for complex interaction, and in many instances, regulating entities are separate from the procurement entities within the US government. And it's important for us to have these entities, communicating so that the risk reward calculation as to the value of the commercial sector is fully appreciated. And so we really come to the table with a whole of government approach to commercial Earth observation geospatial data. Similarly, I think we learned that license agreements will play a critical role in the relationship between USGO and the commercial industry. Now, briefly, let me close with the summary of the first Space Council meeting and the US Space Priorities framework that was published by the Space Council in December. And the Space Council, for the National Space Council, for those who are unaware, is the White House Policy Council that's responsible for ensuring that we capitalize on the rich opportunities presented by our nation's space activities. And they focus broadly on civil, commercial, and national security space. My office has a strong science and technology focus, and I focus on civil and commercial space. So we are one big happy family and work very closely together here within the White House. And the Space Priorities Framework talked about a few key things, Earth observations being one of them. Talked about access to and use of space as a vital national interest. It recognizes the importance of satellites to all aspects of our lives, which includes a collection of Earth observation and geospatial data. And the sentence that calls out Earth observations was on satellites collecting information to monitor our changing planet and to monitor our lands, oceans, and atmosphere. And we also see Earth observations in the public-private partnership specifically called out that we will collaborate through public, private, and philanthropic sectors actually to accelerate the development and use of Earth observation data that will support climate change mitigation. So thank you very much for having me here today. Allison Wolf and Kevin O'Brien will be coming up next with their remarks. However, if there are questions for me in the next few minutes, I look forward to engaging with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esene. Really appreciate you being with us. Because Esene has a schedule conflict and has to run before the end of the session, we are going to take a few questions so we can get those in for you before we move on to Allison and Kevin. So looking in Slido, thanks to those of you who popped those questions in there. So first question I have for you is, how does USGO relate to the OSTP Subcommittee on Open Science?
That's a great question. Thank you for the audience member who asked that. So we work together with Open Science to determine how we can support the goal of using evidence-based science, which is a priority in this administration. USGO, as you know, is an effort that has been a subcommittee that has been going on and releasing lots of accomplishments that help to foster relationships, again, internationally, as I mentioned, and in tribal communities, as well as on the federal regional and local level. And so we are providing information that we have gathered over our history to support the Open Science group. And we have yet to identify, but we are looking for opportunities to work on specific exercises or activities together.
Great, excellent. Yeah, I know in my conversations with different federal agency partners, there are different agencies moving at different speeds when it comes to open science. So I'm excited to see about, there is that subcommittee and looking at that coordination would be really interesting. So a broad question for you. How can researchers and developers, which we have a lot of them here in the audience today, 129 folks, contribute or give feedback to OSTP efforts? What are the best mechanisms for feedback?
That is a great question. I would just say email me, given that I am your resource for this community. Reach out to me. My information is, and I'm easy to reach if you are on social media, but reach out to me. We are an office that takes seriously the ability to engage, the ability and the privilege actually to engage with the public and to engage with academic, commercial and international stakeholders, because we have one climate and we need to work on this together. So please reach out, and I am always taking inputs, feedback, cries of outrage, all of the above.
And we've just put your Twitter handle in the chat, so we'll get that to you. A couple other questions. So yesterday we had a great session on the SBIR and STTR small business programs, and just want to get your perspective on, when looking at public-private partnerships in the commercial sector, thoughts on areas where you're working to advance that innovation within small businesses.
Absolutely. So I think that one thing that's great about the way the government works is we give the federal agencies the ability to run these SBIRs and STTR processes without interference. However, one opportunity that we have is the ability to convene the entire government and ensure that they're talking to each other, and ensure that the priorities that have been set are aligned with what the agencies are working on. As you heard, the economy is one of the 5 priorities. So it's important, and what I do in a lot of my interactions with the interagency, which is all of the federal government departments and agencies, is to ensure that they are thinking about ways to engage more with small businesses, to provide more opportunities to small businesses, to think about ways to be more inclusive and building. I talked about building public-private partnerships, seeing how we can do more of that, and actually the priority on equity covers this, because it's not just demographic equity. We don't want to see the same companies receiving. We want everyone to have an opportunity. So that's something that we make sure that we have the agencies thinking about.
Excellent. Last question for you, and I love this one. Someone asked, what do you see as the key tenets of ferocious innovation?
I have to think about that one, but I do. I think one thing that's so inspiring about Dr. Lander is he gives these bold visions, and I am inspired to implement. So I would turn that back around, because this is an effort that I think we are doing together. And if you have concepts or ideas or things we can be doing better, or agencies could be doing better, that you think we should know about, send me a note on ferocious innovation ideas and concepts, and I will work to work with you and with our colleagues across the federal government to make them happen.
Excellent. I love it. I can see your Twitter feed probably lighting up right now about hashtag ferocious innovation. Well, thank you, Esme, for your time. I invite you to stick around with us as long as you can. And in the spirit of ferocious innovation and in the spirit of public-private partnerships, we can't have public-private partnerships without the public sector, with Esme and many of our federal colleagues and the private sector. So with that, I am really excited to turn things over to Allison Wolf, who is CEO of Vibrant Plenary. Take it away, Allison.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for inviting me. This is such an incredible group of people. So I'm delighted to share a little bit of what we're up to at Vibrant Planet. My quick background, I came out of Silicon Valley. I was early at Netflix. My background is more in the branding, marketing, narrative space, but I also ran user experience design, including weekly user testing to make Netflix as user-friendly as possible. And that stayed with me in what I'm doing today. After that, I worked with a lot of other tech companies, including eBay, Google, and Facebook. And a lot of my career was focused on really trying to help tilt these platforms towards good, launching things like data for good programs and communities around data to solve big public health problems and climate change and various other intractable problems. And a lot of sustainability work. So helping to get a lot of the foundational sustainability strategies, which for Silicon Valley is mostly around data center innovation and renewable energy purchasing. And a lot of those programs have evolved into their net zero efforts today. I got into the wildfire and climate resilience space through some work I was doing with a tech founder, and essentially went on a listening tour to understand different topics that a new sort of innovation center could take on. And I live out west at the time in the Bay Area. And we were in the middle of the 2018 fire season, which at the time was the worst fire season we had had in history in California. And we were eating horrific smoke and seeing all kinds of impacts, especially to underserved communities. And I got very passionate about why these fires are being caused, how the intersection of land management practices for over the last 150 years have intersected with climate change to create this kind of perfect storm. And I saw a very big need to bring rockstar data, data engineering, and user-friendly tools, basically putting data into user-friendly contexts that can inform decisions more rapidly and in a much more improved way. So we've essentially built a platform to try to take that on, starting with wildfire resilience, but we are now starting to work in tropical forest contexts as well. So I'm just going to share my screen and just take you through a little bit of what we have done here. So we are very much about putting earth sciences data to work on the ground. We are a neutral platform, and so we've basically built this machine that can ingest best-in-class data across all these different parameters of resilience. So starting to create a common definition of resilience in forested ecosystems, and then creating a data structure for everything that hangs under that definition across water, biodiversity, forest carbon, forest, what is a resilient forest structure, resilient communities, how do we ensure that communities are fire adapted in fire adapted landscapes, for example, and how do communities create sustainable economies with forest derived products. So we're really kind of taking a systemic approach to this problem. So our goal is to flip forests back to health. A lot of the Western US forests, most states have flipped to being net carbon emission sources, which to me is utterly ridiculous. It's really the driver for taking this on. Forests are some of our biggest carbon sinks, as all of you know, on this call. And a lot of the reason for the flip is management. And so I think that even though climate change is going to continue to hit these ecosystems, I think we can give them a shot at making it through climate change, and so that they can continue to provide these services carbon, being one of them, but also, the fact that 70% of water on the planet originates in forests, and the fact that these systems are connected. If the Amazon tips, the Sierra Nevada snowpack will will diminish greatly. That's a watering system for 13% of global ag in California. And there will be a lot of unhappy skiers in the Lake Tahoe area where I now live. So these systems, as everyone here knows and studies, are tipping. We're focused on California, where climate change is hitting very fast, and where we're seeing these increasingly worsening fires. So some of the scientists that we work with, like Malcolm North and Scott Stevens, are now saying that California is not going to have many trees left in 10 years if we don't intervene faster on restoration efforts. The Amazon is also at a critical point, and in the next 5 to 10 years, there's a chance that enough of it will be cut and burned that it will stop functioning as a rainforest, and we will precipitate a mass dieback where more than 50% of it will become a savanna. And that's the incredible services that the Amazon rainforest provides for all of us. The watering system, the lungs of the planet that we hear about a lot, will cease. So we are at a very, very scary time, but we can actually do something about this. We just need to increase the pace and scale of what we know we need to do. Ideally, I've spent a lot of time with Indigenous peoples, and I wish that we humans could think the way Indigenous tribes think. What's highlighted here, there's a term that the Lakota tribe uses called mitakuyesan, and it's an idea of everything on Earth, the rocks, the soil, the trees, all the vegetation, animals are all our relations. If we thought that way, we wouldn't be in this situation, obviously. And a lot of what we want to try to do is sort of move from Eurocentric perspectives on land management to a much broader perspective on how we relate to land. And I do think, oddly, that technology and data can help us actually do that. We can actually see better. In our capitalist system, what we need to do in very short order is to really make forests more valuable living than dead. That's the kind of blunt truth of the matter. And depending on the ecosystem, we need to get more good fire back in Western landscapes and other fire adapted ecosystems. And we need to immediately stop deforestation and degradation in tropical forests. So to do that is very difficult. It's an incredibly hard data problem. And it's what we've started to take on. And it requires this kind of collaboration, these kinds of groups coming together across the public, academic, private sectors. Ideally, we have Indigenous leadership at the table also helping to guide how do we define resilience consistently, and how do we think about ecosystem benefits. How do we build really high resolution, accurate data? One of the big gaps I saw coming into this space is there's been awesome scientific analysis and models built by the scientific community, but they don't scale down to the tree level, where the actual decision in a Western forest on what biomass do we need to pull out in order to make a forest more heterogeneous and more sustainable. Those data sets don't talk to each other. We still have people walking the ground and painting trees blue on what we're going to cut. And the problem with those different scales not talking to each other is creating a whole cascade of issues in terms of, we don't have consistent monitoring because we don't have consistent data structures at all scales. The other big need that we saw is putting data into robust scenario building. A lot of land management is happening in collaborative groups, and we need those groups to get to consensus much faster than they can today. That requires very robust data visualizations and modeling of scenarios that we can play out into the future in fire regimes and climate change science to understand what is going to actually help these ecosystems last into the future. And then there's a whole market piece. We have to unlock private markets to get more money into restorative efforts and to stop the deforestation in the Amazon. There will never be enough consistent government money because of political swings and other issues to get the work done in time. And so we've got to figure out ways to pull the private sector in the name of public-private partnerships as well. So we started Vibrant Planet really a couple of years ago in a nonprofit. We're a hybrid structure that has a 501(c)(3) nonprofit and a public benefit corporation. I sit on the public benefit corporation, and we really asked the question, how can we engage across sectors to accelerate the restoration and regeneration of every forest on the planet? So we brought together a team of incredible folks from Silicon Valley. A lot of my kind of listening tour, I heard over and over again from land managers, climate scientists, and others, how do we get the people that built Facebook and Lyft and Uber and Netflix to focus on climate change? We need them. And so I made it part of my mission to go get those people. I worked with Neil Hunt way back in the Netflix days. He built the platform that we all use. Guy Bays built the Lyft engineering team. We've got a new chief scientist that some of you probably know, Hugh Safford, who was until the end of the last year, the regional ecologist for the Forest Service. And he also has represented the Forest Service and done a lot of work for USAID worldwide, including in the Amazon. And then policy leaders like Ashley Conrad Seda, who came out of Cali, PA, and helped form the US Climate Alliance. So we really tried to get a cross sector, and Scott Conaway, who's a forester, has made these hard decisions on the ground. He's been the guy painting the trees blue. So we tried to bring this cross-sectoral team together so that we can engage across sectors effectively and build trust across sectors so that we can be more effective as a team. So the wildfire resilience problem right now, obviously it's happening very quickly. Again, we're focused right now in California, but our platform is built to scale worldwide. We're talking to the folks in Colorado right now, which just experienced horrible fires. I'm sure some of you are there in Boulder and Carr. The problem that we set out to solve on the wildfire resilience issue is right now actually getting to an implementable plan in these consensus-driven cross-jurisdictional processes that are happening can take up to 10 years. So if we're going to lose most of California's forests in 10 years, that obviously isn't going to work. Often plans lack information and they default to how can we treat the most acres for the least amount of money. That does not put strategic acres on the table where we've got overgrown wildlands where sort of tidal wave fires start with a PG&E line or a campfire, and with climate fueled winds build like tidal waves, and then they become unstoppable. It doesn't matter about early fire detection systems much, how big a plane you throw at it. These fires are unstoppable, and we just have to get people out of the way. If we can get deeper into the wildlands and put those acres on the table and the value of actually getting in there and treating them and getting them back to resilience, we won't have these massive fires. And then the third thing that we're seeing is billions of dollars. You probably saw the announcement yesterday that we have $50 billion in the infrastructure bill that's moving now towards wildfire resilience. Gavin Newsom last year signed in the fall $1.5 billion for building wildfire resilience. We have lots of money moving into this space and no way to effectively prioritize where should that money go first, second, third, in what order are these ecosystems on the verge of tipping where we need to intervene immediately? And then what do we do? And how do we know if what we're doing on the ground is working? So monitoring, reporting back to Congress and legislatures is really, really important. And we can make that all much easier with data in these useful contexts. So again, the need is alignment across jurisdictions. So all of these players have to come together and agree to a plan. And then you've got special interest groups looking out, rightfully so, for owl habitat in the Sierra Nevada or desert tortoise in Southern California. They have to be at the table to get through a process, and many things have to be considered in a plan. So we need to make sure that they can all see the same picture, and that's where data comes in. The other big problem that we're trying to solve, and this is where the data engineering is very, very challenging, is this tree level view of the world. So we need a data structure like Uber or Lyft has, where they're moving objects around people with self-driving cars. They're connecting a driver to a car. We need that data structure for natural ecosystems so that we can basically synchronize across scales so the scientific analysis can get handed off for implementation if we identify a rich carbon sink or a rich biodiversity area, how do we make sure that the local level where the tree level decisions are being made are aware of those assets, those natural assets? And then how do we monitor up? How do we aggregate data so that we are constantly informing on a continuing basis based on current conditions and how things are going at large scales. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve from a data perspective. So what we've built, our first software that's out live, we're working with some large 300 to 500,000 acre landscapes in California now, is basically an all lands, all scales prioritization. And so we're moving a very kind of one-off, mostly paper-based process into the cloud in an intuitive software platform that you don't have to be able to use ArcGIS to use it. And then, we're basically cutting this 10-year process down to, a focus team can have a plan in a day. It's instantaneous scenario building. And then we're saving about half the cost of the planning process, which can be a $1 to $2 million consulting expense with experts. We can save about half the cost of the planning, but also the implementation with efficiencies. So I'm just going to show a couple of screenshots. So we have data across all of these different categories. So land, fire, water, air. So there's basically a land resume, again, from at the tree level. So I can zoom in and see, did they get my house right? Did they get are the trees around my house there? Are the utility lines outside of my door there? And then we have this consistent definition of resilience. And so people can play with different objectives for land management. If you're around the town of Downeyville, for example, super high risk area in the North Yuba watershed, you might do quite a few treatments around the town. If you're deeper into the canyon and the wildland, the treatments are going to look different. And so different stakeholders can play with different objectives. A CAL FIRE chief is going to have different objectives than a group that's looking out for habitat. And then they can compare what each other has built. And then the system basically spits out a prioritized sequencing of projects. So this is your highest risk area and your highest reward area from an ecosystem benefit perspective. Go here this year. Next year's project is this. And then the system quantifies the ecosystem benefits that all stay tethered together. So even if you optimize for fire adapted communities, you're still getting a lot of carbon, water, biodiversity, and other benefits. It quantifies biomass. We desperately need investment in a biomass industry in California to do something with the carbon that's going to come out of these woods. And then it tees up what's the mix of workforce from helicopter tetherers to high school kids that can do chainsaw thinning on the weekend. So we can start to build a workforce to do the work, which is the next hurdle we're going to try to take on. This is where plans can be played out. So this is a little animation. We call it light a match, where for any scenario that a collaborator creates, they can drop a match and basically look at what the highest probability kind of worst case fire is and how a treatment fares versus no action. So you can imagine being able to communicate to the public or the legislature or Congress on why we chose a certain plan with visuals like this using great data. And then those resilience pillars can be compared and then modeled over 30 years. So that, again, we're informing, okay, so how much benefit do we get from this plan versus this plan in the next couple of years, 30 years out, so that we can really weigh trade-offs more effectively. And then helping collaborative groups come together. Where do we have consensus and where do we not have consensus? We can get work started now where we have consensus, and then we can keep working out the details about this ALPAC and these buildings over here. We'll keep working on how to get to consensus for those other areas. And then monitoring. So across all the different pillars of resilience, how do we know if we're winning? So at large landscapes, statewide, even nationwide, we can help with prioritization. Again, where should we put dollars first and people to do restoration work on the ground? And then, keep sequencing that based on what we learn. So we can do that across any of the pillars of resilience. So this is sort of an aerial view of the full system. I just have a couple more slides. So this is where this data is going into sort of an adaptive management system that all lands, all scales, real-time scenario building, and then tracking benefits. Again, putting data into useful context to drive better decisions. And then we'll get into the implementation side. And our hope is that we can play a role as we stabilize forests in the West. And even we have opportunities now in the Amazon to move money very quickly to incentivize the stopping of deforestation. So really helping to facilitate markets with transparent, trusted data, so that in the Amazon, how do we trust that the carbon value of an area of forest is what the state of Mato Grosso is claiming, right? So really, again, using data to create the transparency and trust that's needed to actually unlock funding to restore or keep these ecosystems intact. So finally, there's a lot of money moving into the space. Newsom's money, the $50 billion that was announced yesterday from the Biden-Harris administration. The climate finance world is massive and it's growing really fast. I was thrilled. I was at COP26 in December, and I was so happy to see nature-based climate solutions on the table after being kind of a sweet little stepchild to the side of fossil fuels. They were center stage, and now we've got this question of now what? There's all these commitments from companies, governments. How are we going to actually move that money to restorative and protective actions on the ground? And the big question right now is, where do we go first? Where are these ecosystems tipping, or where do we have opportunities to unlock carbon sinks, biodiversity hotspots, protect these areas? And then what is going to happen at the tree level to actually make that possible? So that's sort of the question that we are asking. And again, like all the folks here on the call, we are all ears on data sets that you have available, how we can integrate those into our system, where we will continuously be looking for the best in class data at any given time, and how we can integrate it into the decision and prioritization platform we've built. I will stop sharing there, and thanks for allowing me to share all that.
Thank you so much, Allison. I think y'all can see why I got excited when I got a little bit of a glimpse of Allison and now Kevin at this tabletop exercise. And I was like, we've got to get their voices out to the rest of you. So with that, I will turn it over to Kevin O'Brien, who is CEO of Orbital Insight.
Wow, Susan, thanks so much. Allison, I'm not sure how I follow up after that presentation. It was absolutely fascinating. Some scary statistics in there, but it's the work that you guys are doing is just amazing. Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin O'Brien. I'm the CEO of a California-based company called Orbital Insight. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about Orbital, but I wanted to actually talk a little bit about a story. I've been with Orbital Insight for about 5 years. I was originally trained as a software engineer, grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, lived in Europe for many years, and then was really involved in ways to look at integrating new types of data sources, largely in the financial services market. Spent some time in Germany, went to graduate school in France, and then ended up in London working in financial technology. And I had this opportunity to look at the fusion of what we called non-financial types of metrics that could be applied to provide better visibility into the performance of companies and other types of asset classes. And it's been a really fascinating journey. I eventually came back to the United States, to California, started some companies here, sold one of them to a large company in New York. And then I came across Orbital Insight, and they had said, hey, could you come in and help run this company? And I said, what do they do? And they provide geospatial software and analytics to commercial customers, government customers, and NGOs and charities. And so that's really interesting. Can you give me an example of a geospatial analytic application? And they said, we're helping the World Bank map poverty. And this is in my interview. And I said, how in the heck do you map poverty with geospatial sources? And so they walked through what Orbital was beginning to do, which was taking in new types of algorithms and new types of sensors to go look at countries like Sri Lanka and Mexico and basically monitor either down at a village level, like could you count the number of cars and trucks in a village? Could you see if there were new roads being developed? Could you look at the change of the crops in that area? And if they were growing, that meant they were most likely coming out of poverty. And if they were declining, then you could see they're going into poverty. And it helped them really be able to look at either at a hyper local level or at a regional level or at a national level, what's happening on into the earth. And that's what we do at Orbital Insight. So I wanted just to share from kind of the public partnership aspect of what we do as a private company. Over half of our revenue comes from the federal government, and also working with the World Bank and the World Resources Institute. So I wanted to tell you a bit about what we do, and then also how we think about linking in both these new sensors, whether they're electro-optical satellites or radar satellites or AIS shipping data or others, and how we merge that using some of our artificial intelligence and capabilities, and use that also with a lot of fascinating open source sources, largely coming from places like the US government, to solve some pretty big problems, including things like deforestation and other things around humanity on the planet. So I'm gonna go and share my screen and make sure everybody can see this. So, as we said, there's a lot happening in the world. We're obviously going through a pandemic, as we just talked about with Alice and Esne and others, about deforestation. There's obviously military conflicts. Well, what can technology do to help address that? And that's where we'd like to think that we can come in and make a difference in this particular realm. So I'm just going to start my timer here. This is kind of a strange looking picture to start with, but this is to a certain extent what we do, where we go and we look at what's happening on into the earth, and we use artificial intelligence and computer vision and data science and machine learning to extract new types of insights that can help decision makers take decisions, whether it's security-based, humanitarian-based, or economic-based. What we do really at a large scale is we have a platform called the Go platform. It's a cloud-based SaaS application. And we take in new types of commercial satellite sensor feeds, and we take them into the cloud and we process them and we compute and we run storage on them. And we apply that, a lot of our computer vision and data science and machine learning expertise to extract insights out of those particular images, without actually having to deliver the image. But what we've done in the past few years is we link in other types of sensors and other types of sources to make it easier, so you don't have to be necessarily a PhD or a data science expert, but more as a business analyst or humanitarian analyst or someone else that's in the supply chain, for example. So we take a lot of these different sources together. We take our computer vision and data science. We've built this large library of where are all the factories, where are all the roads, where are all the forests out in the world, and then look for change in those particular areas around either an environmental question, a business question, or a security question, and then deliver that out to our users. And part of what you're going to see here is this really fascinating, intersection of questions that you'd think may be just related to the environment, but they're very related to the economy, or they could be related to security, or they could be related to the performance of a company. And what we have found is this intersection of questions that people have open up the opportunity to share and collaborate more and more results across the world. So generally what we enable our clients to do is to go in and we help them ask questions. Part of our mission is to help customers understand what's happening on and to the earth. So when you say it with such a bold statement like that, you're like, how do you unlock all of those insights? Well, the beauty of geospatial sensors and sources, especially with satellites, is that they cover every inch of the entire planet. And there's more and more of them being launched. So if you can imagine, there's hundreds, if not soon thousands of cameras circumnavigating all over the planet, taking pictures. And so we looked at it and said, that's a great thing, because you can start really looking at things like deforestation at scale, environmentally sustainable supply chains at scale, security issues anywhere in the world, as well as economic issues. But with that comes a problem. How do humans consume all of these pictures and imagery? And that's where we looked at it and said, why don't we use the latest in technology around artificial intelligence, specifically on things like computer vision and machine learning, and start building some tools that could help thousands, if not millions of people access all of this data and be able to kind of ask these different types of questions and then be able to get results very, very quickly without too much complexity. So what we help people do is to come in and say, okay, what are you actually looking for? To keep on to the theme with Allison, are we wanting to track deforestation in a particular region of Malaysia or Indonesia, or in the Amazon? or in India or other parts of Asia. And so we get, okay, let's pick that particular capability, that particular issue. What type of sensors do we have access to as a company that could begin to address that question? And that's still largely on electro-optical satellites and radar-based satellites. And then we say, what type of other objects do you want to track? Do you want to be able to look at water sources in these particular regions, to be able to look at the change of water levels? Do you want to look at road activity around these forests or around these population areas? What's changing? And so with our tools, you can look at what's happening today, but you can also go into the past and say, over the past 5 years, show me the change detection that you've seen in a particular region or particular area, and help me put that into more of my detailed analysis. So we help people go in and look at what are the different types of questions you have, what are the types of objects or assets we may want to help you pull in to monitor, and then where in the world are you looking for? So we've built this very large, it's called AOI catalog, or area of interest. And it could be, again, commercial, environmental, societal, security-based, maritime-based. There's a lot of different themes, and we help people basically go in and map out these different areas. And then really with a click of a button to go in and begin to analyze what you're seeing. So are we seeing a change in forestry activity around production of palm oil, for example, which is a big initial driver of that issue? Are we seeing the change of assets, of military assets, for example, in different parts of the world by looking at counting aircraft or other types of assets? And then we deliver that in a pretty easy to use interface. Again, we want to basically be able to get it down to someone that could literally be working for an NGO or charity in the field, not just at the headquarters location or at some other location. And then we use the same type of tool to help people monitor what may be happening. So you don't have to be looking at a screen or an application or a mobile device all of the time. You can go in and literally just set up alerts to say, hey, we've noticed some change in activity, really anywhere in the world that you want to track. So what's really fascinating, and I'll give some examples of some of the clients that we work with in a second, but the key point, and this is a very busy slide, my computer vision and model engineering team gave me this to say, well, Kevin, this is kind of what we do. And I'm like, good Lord, I'm the CEO and I'm having a hard time tracking some of this. They call it a marketecture of taking in different types of geospatial sensors and sources. So as you can see on that left-hand side, satellite imagery, aerial, foot traffic data, vehicle activity, ship traffic. But the key point really going down to that lower level here is that we use a lot of open source sources, because I've been a huge fan of this literally since when I was a young engineer, that there's a lot of really great data sources that can be used both in isolation, but more importantly, when you begin to merge those together, you can deliver faster insights at lower cost to more people. And the world's largest publisher of some of the best open source data is the US government. And so this is one area that the ESIP's been talking about. We talk about it as a private company. We talk about it with the World Bank, the World Resources Institute. We talk about it with even our defense customers and law enforcement customers, that there's a lot of data that's out there right now that has extreme high levels of value. And when you begin to link that, infuse that in with some of the more proprietary types of sources that we bring in as a company, then that's where the magic really happens. And so what we do on the back end is there's different types of sensors. And so we'll ingest those into an AWS cloud. We also work very closely with the folks at Microsoft. We're porting our platform over to Azure to be able to kind of really leverage the power of the Azure platform. We do a lot of very technical back-end work of scene aggregation, orthorectification on different sensors, specifically on the electro-optical cloud detection to filter that out. And then our computer vision engineers, and our company is about 100 employees currently. Most of them are engineers in computer vision, machine learning, platform engineering. And so they'll begin to work in classifying, building CV models or ML models to look at what are we actually seeing out in the world? What level of deforestation do we actually see right now in these particular areas? And then they'll run some temporal normalization and spatial imputations, and then push that out to our customers, ideally in the form of algorithms that are packaged into our front end tool. Same thing happens when you go down and look at like vehicle data and foot traffic data and others. Like you look at noise filtering, you'll have dwell time filtering, velocity filtering, user panel changes. So there's a lot of moving parts that go on with some of these new geospatial sensors. But again, what we're doing now is say, great, now let's pull that in with ground truth data, ideally open source, so we can share it with more and more people and keep the cost down. It could be demographic-based information, census block information, event-based information, and that could come from Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, Forestry Department, Department of Defense, a lot of, again, open source, non-classified sources. So when people ask what we do, this is kind of the back end of how we kind of make some of the geospatial software and analytic sausages, they say, to get this out to more and more of our customers. Just to talk about some of the work that we do for some of our customers, just wanted to kind of highlight some of this. And I want to go back to both my original story of how I came into the company and really looking at how do you track poverty? How do you track deforestation? I was relatively new to the geospatial community. Again, I'd worked mostly in finance. And that first conversation we had with deforestation was with the World Resource Institute. So we had a contract, we were doing some research there, and then that linked into the World Bank and mapping poverty. And then the next thing that we found was the deforestation issue. Obviously, it's a massive issue for all of society, but we also see more and more publicly traded and private companies are becoming much more serious about this. And so we took a lot of the learnings that we had and the technology that we had previously done with nonprofits, and we started working with people like Unilever, which I'll talk about in a second, that said, hey, this is a big issue. We want to make sure we're not part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution. Orbital, what can you do to help us? And I'll show you an example of what we're doing with them in a second. But the point of my story is the work that we started in an NGO, a charity, it comes now into a publicly traded company. And then we've come full circle back with some of the work that we've done around deforestation for a consumer product company. And now we have US government customers coming in and saying, hey, can we leverage some of that technology that you've developed for that consumer product company to address these issues that we have back home in the US? So from a private partnership standpoint, we see extraordinary amounts of value that can be delivered both to nonprofits, NGOs, to look at some of these large environmental issues, but we're seeing very clearly more and more commercial enterprises are taking this more seriously. And we are working with some of the bigger folks that have a larger microphone for these types of issues, especially around sustainable sourcing, to be able to share that across the industry. And we're trying to help accelerate that as much as possible. A project that we're doing right now, I literally have 3 teams right now on the US Mexican Arizona border that are standing side by side running test flights as we speak. And the big problem that they've had, and it's a very known topic of illegal immigration coming in from Mexico, but we had said the bigger story and the really horrible story here is the loss of life on the US Mexican border. The number of people that are being told to cross, they pay $7,000. They have mules that take them over the border, and they're basically direct to say, go climb that mountain, and in 30 miles, you'll hit the I-10 and somebody will pick you up. Many people die in that process. And so we are developing technology called geospatial search and rescue that comes in and uses these different sensors and sources. So we're hitting with satellites, with RF devices, infrared devices. We're running low altitude solar powered drones right now to go in and look for people in distress to be able to rescue them. And we're already seeing very, very positive results from that. And so this for us is very, very important from us as a company, not just to go in and say, let's go work with a defense customer or a law enforcement customer, let's go make money. It's like, how do we save lives using geospatial technology? And this is something that we're very proud of, and we're very excited to kind of grow the relationship here, because we think it can make a bigger and bigger impact. You have drug trafficking, human sex trafficking going on, and it's something that we just think is the more that we can provide technology to address that and bring these issues up to society, they'll see that, one, it's a big issue beyond just immigration, but there are very innovative companies. There's really great open source data. And there's new types of geospatial tools that can address these issues today. It's not tomorrow, it's not 10 years into the future, it's right now. And then we think that's just super, super important to get across to industry. This is from a national intelligence standpoint, this is another thing that we've done where we do work on, is there a way to use our technology to help avoid conflict, to better inform decision makers of what's actually happening on the ground, not kind of rumors, what you see going through social media or other types of media outlets, like literally what's happening on the Russian-Ukrainian border, what's happening with other things like maybe in the South China Sea. And this is all non-classified, largely open source sources that we're using, but we're delivering that to deliver a lot of impact. In this case, for a defense customer, but almost all of the same technology that we've been using for the other commercial businesses that we have, as well as the work we do with NGOs, charities. This last piece, I want to just go over. This again is with Unilever. They came to us, and this is again where I think as the topic of sustainable sourcing and deforestation and other things about the environment grow louder and louder, which they should, I think there's a very interesting intersection of not only doing the right thing for the planet, but showing how that there's a lot of upside for the people that are involved in the development and the distribution of products and services that can also have a positive impact. So we actually met Unilever folks about 3 years ago at a conference, I think in Amsterdam. And they just said, hey, we've got multiple problems here. And we said, what is it? And they said, well, palm oil is one of the biggest culprits of deforestation traditionally in the world. And we want to make sure that we are the right type of corporate citizen doing that in a sustainable way. And we know it's a big problem. And we said, okay, what's the actual problem that you have? They said, well, we don't know how to monitor and link all of our suppliers in Indonesia and Malaysia to ensure that if we certify them as a sustainable supplier, we want to make sure that they're sustainably sourcing palm and not doing bad to the environment and bad to the economy. And so we looked at kind of the issue of working with literally thousands of mills and factories in those countries, and you can get down to literally millions of farmers, and say, is there a way to use geospatial software and sensors to help address this issue? And we think that we found the way to do that. And it's basically linking the different providers in the supply chain using some of our technology. So when a farmer or a plantation owner says they're going to deliver a shipment to a certified Unilever distribution facility, they know that those trucks or cars or whatever being used have not gone to a non-sustainable source. So they want to make sure that they have sustainable palm going into their products. And again, there's the environmental aspect to it, but it's also very clear, and you're seeing, especially with younger demographics, especially with millennials, they will not buy your products if you are not really becoming a better global corporate citizen. And it's not a broad statement, it's very, very specific. And so the customers like Unilever and Nestle and others are coming in saying, look, some of our sustainable brands, they're the fastest growing brands that we have. Customers like them, and we'd like to develop more of them. So how do we help more and more of our supply chain become sustainable to be that good corporate citizen? So we've started with palm oil. We're moving into soy. We're looking into cocoa. Some other folks have said, hey, can you help us like sustainable cotton coming out of China? We haven't cracked that code yet. But what the good news, I think, that's coming out of these relationships that we're developing with customers, as well as with NGO and charities, as well as with governments, is that there are ways to do the right thing here, using some of these new tools, using some of this new tradecraft that we have, but then more importantly, working with these other sources of content that can help you provide better visibility into what's actually happening on into the earth. And we think there's a lot of positive. For Unilever, at the end of the day, they're a public company. They want to grow their business. They want to grow their market share, and we're helping them do that. And so there's a very strong economic incentive for someone like Barry Callebaut or Unilever or Mars or Henkel and others. But the beauty of what we're seeing, not saying for the first time, but we are seeing the momentum increase, is like, wow, we get to be able to help do the right thing, to be able to kind of be a good corporate citizen, good part of the planet, and at the same time, develop better products, healthier for the consumers and healthier for the planet, and be able to do that and to grow their businesses. So it's an exciting area to work in. We're very proud to be working in this area. We'd like to really highlight not just the fact that we have a nice logo called Unilever, but it's more importantly about, what are we going to leave our children in the future? Like, what kind of planet are we going to leave? The work that Allison's doing is so important around deforestation. And we want to also, when I talk to my employees, they have their objectives, they have their key results, they've got their goals and whatnot. But I always go back to, we want to basically be that company that people look up to. It's like they're really doing some important work to be able to help the planet, to help people on the planet, and not just today, but for the future. And so we're very proud to be doing that work. I think it's relatively, using the baseball analogy, relatively early innings still. And you could look at that as kind of a risk, like, oh gosh, there's a lot of unknown. But I think that discovery that we're working through right now is quite exciting. And the tabletop exercise that we had previously, as a name, the White House and the other folks, it's really fascinating because you can bring together so many smart people into this room, and you look at some of these big topics, and to a certain extent, you kind of know what we need to do. And to be able to kind of get your marching orders, as Allison said, get the right budgets, get the right sponsors, and really get the right ownership of this. And from where we come from a technology standpoint, we're extremely bullish on the ability to take these new types of sensors and new types of sources, again, to tackle these issues. We're not a silver bullet solution, but we definitely feel that some of these new capabilities can be part of the solution to those problems. And we're just fully committed to doing that today, tomorrow, and the day after that as well. So I'm getting close to the end of my time. I'm going to hand it back to Susan if people want to have any questions, obviously for Allison, myself, or anybody else. But I really wanted to thank everybody for the time today, and look forward to any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate your perspective, and I am very confident that both your and Allison's organizations are doing great work in the world. And one of the things I love about ESIP is that this community has public, federal, state, government, private, academic researchers, and I believe that no one entity can solve the challenges that we have alone, and that it's through convenings like this where we can bridge across sectors, that we can really start to creatively solve these problems. So thank you both. And yes, there are lots of questions coming in on Slido. I hope you guys, it's nice to be able to see them and think in your head a little bit. I'm going to have to go with Bruce's question first with 11 votes up. And this is an issue that's particularly important to the ESIP community and people who create and steward data. And also looking at, we were talking data stewardship yesterday, and what data sets do we invest public resources into, and how do we value data sets? So how can we do better to ensure, particularly in public-private partnerships, that the underlying data producers and providers are properly credited? And I guess I might expand that a little just to say, it's the crediting of those data sets that use. I mean, we talked about kind of building on the value of an individual data set, right? So how do we, what's your kind of take on how do we value and credit individual data sets?
I'm happy to answer from my perspective, Susan. So there are several private sector players that have come online in our space, in the data and especially the forest carbon market space, that are very opaque. They are not open book on sourcing or citing the data that they build internally or other data sets that they're pulling in to build their data. We are sort of the antithesis of that. So we went to this open platform kind of perspective where we can, like I said, pull in any of the best in class data that is out there. We have I think 800-page bibliography for land tender right now, just for the early geographies that we are working in. And so that will continue to build, and we are completely open book on all the data sources. And then we, on our nonprofit side, we are starting to build out a data commons, all the data that we are producing internally to get that tree level view of forests, which was a gap that we identified. We wouldn't build data if we didn't have to, like I said. We are basically making that publicly available, fully cited in our nonprofit for anyone in the scientific community to pull down and work with. And we're hoping to build a real community around that data. We have a data partnership with Dr. Sasan Sachi, who I'm sure many of you know. He's one of the leading forest carbon experts in the world. The data he delivers into our public benefit corporation will also be transferred and made publicly available in our data kind of catalog and commons, and also through his own ways of making his data publicly available. So that's our approach, is full citing. And I do think communities like this and kind of data management communities like the Eleanor Ostrom Center is incredible at Indiana University, really thinking about standards and publishing. How does scientific publishing happen now that we need to move so quickly? I think really thinking about that and data governance are all so important, and conversations we want to get more deeply involved in.
Yeah, I would follow on with Allison. Totally agree with everything she just said, that when we think about data value and accreditation, especially on the open source side of things, I do think still one of the challenges today is that, as I've said, I think the world's greatest publisher is the US government. They have just a treasure trove of amazing data. It's still relatively hard to find and access at certain periods of time. And I don't know if there's a single type of solution for that. I have a content acquisition team that literally is scouring constantly for new sources. I would love the discovery process to be easier, especially as Allison said, when you have some of these newer sources of content coming in. We love contributing any type we're working with, but we need to know where they are, the frequency, the availability of that, and to be able to kind of commingle that with other types of sources as well. So I think that there's still some work to be done there, but again, I think the discovery process is the important part, because there's so many smart people on this call, and like some of the engineers that I have, when they get their hands on this, they're like, okay, let me try to kind of really start to work with this. And I think that's another aspect that sometimes I think people are like, okay, I have this data set and I have to figure out this long game plan of how I'm going to share that across multiple industries or sources. I like to look at it from an agile standpoint, that at times you can come in like we did with the tabletop exercise. You go, okay, wildfires. Now, if we looked at sources X, Y, and Z, and we could pull those in within like a 2-week period, we could develop a new analytic that delivers this type of insight. It might not work for maybe a different region or a different type of event, but very quickly, and this is the beauty of Silicon Valley engineers, as Allison worked with for many, many years, like you can bring stuff out very, very quickly. And the faster you can do that, then the faster you can collaborate with more folks in society and in different organizations to be able to say, hey, this is what we came up with. What did you come up with? And to be able to kind of collaborate faster on that. So I think there's a lot of ways, one, to increase the discovery and then accelerate the sharing of that, and then the results that are derived off of that, whether it's public or private or hybrid.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. There have been a lot of questions moving around in Slido, especially a lot of interest in some of the kind of social justice and equity questions. Before we move to those, I want to take Pierre's question on the value of open source data. So the value of, he says that the value of open source data is often mitigated by the cost of standardizing and cleaning it up. What is your approach to balance the return on investment there? And while it is for Kevin, I think both of you probably have perspective on that.
Well, I actually, in my previous life, I built a company that we built a extremely robust product-based classification system, or a taxonomy, or some folks call it ontology. I'm a huge proponent that one of the easiest ways to have new types of insights, to link in different types of data sets, is to have very robust taxonomies and ontologies from like an enterprise data governance standpoint. Because what you see right now, Susan, is, and this has been going on for decades, that you have silos of content. And people have made lots of money saying, hey, we're going to break down the silos. And guess what? They're still there. And so I think one of the best ways to do this is very robust taxonomy development, very robust entity management, entity and identification management. Because when you have something like that, then you can take your data scientists, or you can take your content managers or your content engineers, and be able to map in these newer sources. And that's really where the magic happens, because if you've already done some of the underlying data management work, when you bring in, let's say Allison has a new source coming in specifically on deforestation, it shouldn't be like, oh, it's an entirely new source. Nope, it's a new source we can relatively easy couple into our overall data model. And then you hand it to data scientists and analysts, and they can, I think, extract insights much, much faster. So I'm a big fan of more robust kind of enterprise data management.
Yeah, and I can just briefly add, one of the problems sometimes in the tech sector is engineers build things that they think are cool, but they don't actually have a customer. And I think that can happen with data also. And so part of what we're trying to do is really ground the use of data in contexts that are driving decisions, and understanding on the ground. And so I think that's where some of these public-private partnerships and creating standards bodies that are sort of purpose-built. So, we should bring together a committee of people across sectors that are looking at the wildfire resilience problem and really thinking about data for that user context. What do we actually need, and how do we create standards for how that data appears in useful applications? But I do think it has to be this cross-sector collaboration to create those standards. We can't at Vibrant Planet just decide what that should be. There's a similar conversation in here about how do we define resilience, and that changes depending on what context you're operating in. We have to work together to create common definitions and standards for data based on use cases. I really believe that. And so we're all about trying to collaborate on those issues.
I would actually foot stomp on that, because I can tell you that when people have come in and looked at our technology, they're like, oh my gosh, you could answer like thousands of questions. I go, why don't we answer 3 really well? And then we'll go to the 4th and the 5th and the 6th, rather than you have engineers especially, and then some of your salespeople going off and talking like, yes, we can do this, and yes, we can do that. And you find out that you might be able to do it. It's going to take like 3 months of hardcore engineering and data science work, and you'll find out there's 2 customers for it. Now, it could be for the World Resource Institute or the World Bank, but you do need to have some of that discipline. But I think, again, the real magic happens, and we've done this ourselves, where we go and we work on something for a particular use case, like I talked about before with the Unilever, that actually started with the World Bank and is now being used by a defense customer. And now you have we call it the rinse repeat, which we like. But it is kind of you have to be very diligent, as Allison said, with how you're kind of going after those different use cases.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it was in the tabletop exercise that we did with Kevin and Allison. I remember a specific moment where ESIP had brought in one of our speakers from the summer meeting, who was the I believe it was fire chief out of Boulder. He's had a busy couple months, and I remember Kevin just saying, "Look, like, I want to make sure that you get access to the data you need in the moment." And I was just really fired up by that. And I'll give a plug for our session later today. That is, thank you. Yes, it was Dave in the chat. For our plug later, a session later this afternoon on wildfire. That is something that a lot of people in this community are really trying to gather around. And I would actually invite Kevin and Allison, look into your teams. Which engineers on your staff need to engage with our community? We would love to see you both as full ESIP partners. Partnership is free, and would love for your folks to show up and engage in those conversations.
Great.
So I am now going to go to the question that it was kind of a summary of a bunch of questions you're probably seeing, but I like it phrased best. How do you engage the social scientists or others who study the issue of surveillance and inequity with respect to the application of technology? Or more broadly, how do each of your companies look at the ethics associated with the work that you do?
So why don't you let me start that one, because I know I have probably some people asking about our customers. We have an extremely rigorous process around ethics and privacy, because there's a lot. It's a very fluid, liquid market right now in terms of when you look at the development of artificial intelligence, that there's some strong capabilities, and if you put them into the hands of the wrong people, they can use it for nefarious purposes, and we recognize that. And even those use cases that we talk about, you could also get very, very creative and go, oh, I could do X, Y, or Z and have some result. And you kind of come back. We do this all the time within our company. If there's any time something is ever proposed by a customer, we have an ethics and privacy committee. that meets bi-weekly to bring up any type of activity that we've seen to ensure that we as a firm are doing the right thing. I think it was as, I forgot who the entrepreneur was. You can build, it takes 20 years to build your reputation, about 10 minutes to destroy it. Warren Buffett, I think, said that. And I'm very, we're here to build a company for the long term, and just to go make a quick buck in doing something and it ethically could be challenging. You're like, that's not a smart thing to do. You don't want to do it for your company. You don't want to do it for your shareholders, and most importantly for your employees. That the power to do good so outweighs the other activities that could be used for alternative purposes, that we're just focusing on that. And when we talk about good, it is about protecting life. So there's some defense applications that we use, saying if we develop this capability, maybe you don't have to send an air crew out to go investigate something. You don't have to send people into the field where it could be quite dangerous down at the border. That's how we look at it. But we have a very rigorous kind of review process around all things ethics and privacy. I've actually been talking to my peers in the industry, talking to Will and Robbie at Planet, folks at Airbus and others, to say we should all be coming together, and rather than reacting to this, we should be very transparent about how we think about geospatial insights, software, and analytics, and making sure that we're taking the lead, especially in the United States, on the right way to be developing these capabilities. So I think you can see I'm pretty passionate about it because it's important, not just for me, but more importantly for society and the environment, but also for all of our employees as well, who are very, very passionate about this as well.
Thank you. Allison, what are your thoughts?
So we are tiptoeing into this. We are mostly working in wildlands, but we obviously abut the wild urban interface. And as Kevin said, I also have spent a lot of time with the leadership team at Planet on these topics. With this high resolution data, we need a tree and house level view to deal with, how are we going to build tree and house level resilience? And so we do get into privacy issues, right? We're seeing people's backyards. So we're trying to navigate how we manage that high resolution view of the world when we are getting into land, other people's land ownership. And I don't have a clear answer yet. We're struggling through it, and all ears on how others have managed that. One of the other key pieces that we deal with is cultural sites. And that's data that has to be very carefully managed. We need it because we have to plan around cultural sites so that we aren't damaging very, very crucial areas. But that data also can't be exposed because unfortunately people are out there that will go dig things up. Similarly with habitat. We have to be really careful with exposing certain habitat data. So these are all issues that we are working very hard to manage, and where we can make data open and useful to others that we've built or can help people get to through linking out. But then where we keep things very secure and private and only for specific localized planning purposes, again, to put that into that use case.
Excellent. Thank you both for that. We just have 2 minutes left, and there's so many great questions. It's really hard for me to choose which one to go towards. I think the one, it's actually not a question. Steve Diggs had a comment, isn't it obvious that forests are more valuable alive than dead? And I love that I feel the frustration in your words there, Steve.
Yes.
Isn't it a matter of what timescales we're talking about and values? So I guess I would ask you guys, as CEOs, as leaders, what are your thoughts on how I've been giving a whole lot of talks on urgency, and then our opening plenary, an Indigenous panel said that it is urgent that we slow down. And I was like, oh, you're right. Oh, I'd love your thoughts on timescales and how do we do the work we need to do, achieve the results we need to achieve, and move communities of people along, both in seeing the timescales we need them to see and embracing the values that maybe we personally hold. and just any thoughts kind of on your leadership approaches and how you treat those issues with the people that you work with.
Well, again, when I put that slide up, I mentioned there is this idea of all my relations, and it unfortunately, for whatever reason, European people that moved all over the world, including down to South America, had a different perspective. I mean, we clear cut 97% of forests in the United States 150 years ago. We did the Lorax, we played it out. And it's the foundation of why our forests are so screwed up. It's why we have mono forests that all grew up at the same time, and then we didn't manage them back to heterogeneity. And it's a big part of why they're blowing up now, in addition to fire suppression policies. We've been putting fires out where land needs fire to regenerate, and cull down for overgrown forests in places like California. and yet we don't have the economic incentives in place in California to drive the restoration of land. But big trees, board feet, are worth $10 a ton on the market. Small trees and shrub that can make things like biochar is worth 10 cents. So we don't have the right economics to actually cause the restoration to happen. Similarly, in the Amazon, we're losing the Amazon because we're mowing it down and burning it, because the global world is valuing gold on an illegal, all the gold coming out of Brazil is on an illegal market. People still buy it. We are mowing forests down to grow soy for global cattle feed because we keep buying industrial beef, and we are mowing them down for cattle grazing in a place that's not meant for that. We're creating grasslands in place of forests in Brazil. And so my point is that unfortunately the world, for the most part, outside of indigenous peoples, values is basically saying we value these things over the forest standing, and it's really unfortunate. I think in the Western U.S. context, the economic values aren't clear. People don't understand that our forests are in a completely unnatural state, and that the economics are broken. In the Amazon, it is crystal clear what we are valuing and what we are not valuing, in my perspective.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think that I sent out a note to my team over the holiday, and there was I'm trying to share this YouTube video with everybody on the show right now. It was called and it's literally about the CEO of a Dutch chemical company, and really doing the right thing. And I called it We Know, and I said, we as a company, we know what we need to do. We know how to do it. We know how to make a positive impact on the planet plus our customers, and we can do it now. And so I think from a timing standpoint, I agree, you need to take a step back and reflect. At the same time, though, what we're trying to emphasize to people is that there are capabilities that we can deliver, or partial capabilities that we can deliver today, to address some of these bigger problems. And we don't want to shy from that. We just want to lean into it. So we're trying to increase our awareness about it. But more importantly, inside my own company, it's like, folks, we can do this now, and we can help people now. We can help folks all over the world that aren't even our customers, if we have that commitment, that type of psychological commitment to do the right thing. And so we're very, very invested in that. But it ultimately, Susan, gets back to, it's the adoption of what you want to do and how you want to help. We don't want to be this obnoxious California company like, oh, we want to just run and help. It's like, please, if there's something we can lean in, because all of our employees love this type of work. It's why they come to work for us, to make a bigger impact, not just to go sell stuff. And so we're doing it inside the company. And I just think more in the industry and just societies in general, that if we know we're in partnership together, we can really tackle more of these issues in the short term than people, I think, realize sometimes. And it just really gets down to that human commitment to make it happen. So.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you both for being with us here. There are so many more excellent questions. I may have those all dropped into a Google Doc, share that with you guys, and then we can put that in with all of our meeting assets so that people that ask those questions. So if you have time, I will try and get that over to you, and maybe we can get a few more of those questions answered. Thank you so much for being here with us. I really appreciate it. Now we're going to move this afternoon. We move into our afternoon sessions. If you're able to join us, you are most welcome in any and all sessions. And let's continue the conversation. And I look forward to seeing everybody, if not this afternoon, tomorrow at our State of ESIP Plenary, where we'll also get updates from our federal partners. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.